What's up, everybody? Ryan Thomas back on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast as I'm joined by TrainWreckSports.com's very own Jake Watkins. We just talked a little bit about the Buffalo Bills draft plans. As you all know, it is Buffalo Bills draft night. It is NFL draft night. And I've talked about the draft a lot these last few weeks, as has Jake on his Twitter. You can follow him on Twitter. Jake, give him the Twitter handle at
Wake Jotkins, WakeJatkins. I thought I was funny in high school, my friends and I. So we always flipped our initials, and then it was fun in games until we realized some of our friends, their initials were like MM, so it didn't work out.
Oh, I see. Well, yeah, I mean, there's times where I think I'm funny, and I realize I'm the only one laughing at my jokes. So it happens to the best of us.
Yeah, I'm in good company. It's good to know that.
Right. Yeah, so we've talked about the draft, the Bills, and we talked about a lot of other NFL topics and a lot of NCAA topics pertaining to the University of Buffalo and their football program and Tyree Jackson and Anthony Johnson and most importantly Khalil Hodge, who Jake and I agree is being completely disrespected by draft, just such disrespect. But I want to talk about the Buffalo Sabres, and I shouldn't want to talk about the Buffalo Sabres, but I want to talk about the Buffalo Sabres for the people. I'm doing this for them. This isn't about me.
For the people.
For the people. Right.
I respect that.
Right. People's champ. So let's talk about the Sabres, Jake. Let's see what you think. If you were to describe in one word this Sabres season, using one word, what word would you associate with this season?
Exhausting. I think that would have to be it. Because it was just, or downward sloping. There could be a hyphen in there, so that could be one word, I guess.
Right.
It obviously we all know how it went. We were excited. We were extremely excited. We were weary, and then we were like, oh, God, this is really happening, isn't it? For about 4 months straight. So, and then obviously all culminated in Housley being let go, which, of course, like most other people that don't want to be different on Twitter, I think that was the right decision.
Right.
It's not per se about his skill set as a coach. I think he could still be a good assistant coach in the NHL. You saw what he was able to do with Nashville's defense. But at the same time, you looked at PK Subban and just a much more stacked blue line from top to bottom, better goaltending. Maybe not much far ahead of the Sabres on offense, but they're so good on the back end that carries them to the playoffs every year. And so, what really got him in the end was his mismanagement of the young guys like Casey Middlestad and Lawrence Pilot, Will Borgen. I was happy to see at the end of the season he actually put Olafson on a line he deserved to be on the first line with Eichel and Skinner, because he was actually able to show that he belongs in the NHL. So that's one good thing the Sabres have to look forward to. But other than that, and the obvious with Dahlin, we're kind of in a weird spot because we don't know, is Jeff Skinner going to be back? Are they going to be able to fill the role at number 2 center? Is Sobotka going to get 20-plus minutes every single night next year?
Jeez.
We don't know.
Oh, God, I hope not.
Yeah.
Oh, man. You used the word, what was the word you used? It was like 2 words kind of, but one with a hyphen?
Downward sloping.
Downward sloping. You know what word I'm going to use? And it's a word that I don't think is being used enough when talking about the Sabres. Dysfunctional. Dysfunctional. And the reason why I say that is because whether Phil Housley should have or shouldn't have been fired, I don't even think we should have to ask ourselves that question anymore. because it happened and it's done and it's over with. So it's been a couple weeks. It's probably been almost about a month now, right? Maybe I'm wrong.
We've had some good time to digest.
Yeah, no, we've had more than enough time to digest it. So I'm not even going to ask, listeners or viewers or whoever anymore. Do you like that Phil Housley was fired? Because he should have been fired. So there's that, and just the fact that we will be entering a season which is coming off a season with a lot of turmoil, a lot of dysfunction, where Jack Eichel will be playing for his third head coach in his 5-year career, entering his 5th season. I think that that's a massive problem, and you can look at it from any which way. You can blame it on Housley, you can blame it on the players not playing for Housley, you can blame it on any, but I blame the ownership. I have to look at the top, because when you have an owner that I definitely appreciate the fact that Terry came in and bought the Sabres in 2011 and 2014. He might have
saved them. He might have kept them here.
Right.
I have to, acknowledge that.
I'll preface my statements here before I go on my epic rant here without going on too long, and I'll give you your time to react to it for sure. But it just
take your time. You're good.
You step up to the podium after buying both franchises and say the sole purpose for the Sabres is to win the Stanley Cup. The sole purpose for the Bills is to win the Super Bowl. And in between that, you allow your wife to come in and run somewhat day-to-day operations of the Bills. We just talked about it for almost an hour. The Bills are in much better shape than the Sabres. And Terry is the one that's running the Sabres, and Kim is the one that's largely running the Bills. So if Terry isn't if Terry isn't the problem, he's got to be part of the problem, right?
I would 100% agree with that. And it's not, and I don't think it's his fault as a businessman. I think it's more he let his emotions as a lifelong Sabres fan get in the way of who he was hiring. After, when the season started going downhill, a lot of people started coming out and saying that Housley wasn't doing a good job, whether it was people in the media or, just fans in general. And there was the one quote by Rob Ray that I'm never going to forget. At least, the general idea of it. And he said that when he came into the league, Housley was cold to him and took shifts away from him at practice. He disrespected him, and he just didn't feel like the rookies earned anything until they earned it. And the times have changed, obviously. You can't coach players the same way you did back in, the 80s. And even when Housley came into the league, he felt that he was a notch above everybody because he was so good, and he didn't have to earn anything. So it's always been, his way or the highway, veterans over young guys, and that translated into his coaching style. And this is a very good segue. We're going to try to be a little more positive now about what can happen, because I'm sick of talking about that bald-headed, whale-tail, hair-looking dude that used to stand behind the bench. Okay.
Which one? Which one? Lindy Ruff?
Housley.
Phil Housley.
No, Lindy's a great guy.
I was going to say, don't pick on Lindy.
I love Lindy. I was upset to see him go, but I remember it had to happen.
Right.
A few weeks ago, I put out an article saying who my thoughts on potential candidates and, who my dream one was. And my dream one was not McClellan. My dream one was not Alain Vigneault, both of who have been hired, which I'm very thankful for, because I did not want to go down that road. I'm looking at Rickard Gronborg from the Swedish national team.
Right.
He's coached Dahlin in the Olympics. And, he said nothing but great things about him. And Gronberg has said that he involves defensemen a lot in his game plan, which is the way that the NHL and all hockey around the world is moving. And that, that Dahlin's just a great kid, great to work with, determined. He also isn't afraid of analytics. He says, and I have a whole quote in front of me right now, but I won't read the whole thing, but basically he says that you need to combine analytics and video review and, film study and everything in order to make the best product on the ice possible. And, that's the way that hockey is going. Not that it has to be analytics driven, but maybe more analytics supplemented so that, you can use more as many possible inputs as possible to get a better product. And, and he also talked about in an interview with The Athletic about, how he likes to break barriers. He basically put himself into conversation for the Sabres head coaching job because his agent put him out there and he told his agent to.
Wow.
And he talks about, constantly adjusting, that if your team isn't able to fit your system, you don't have to make the players adjust. You have to adjust your system to the players because it's not a coach's game. It's a player's game.
It's a player's game.
And just seeing even a potential candidate who has been talked about have this kind of mindset going into the NHL for the first time as a potential head coach, if we were to hire him, I would be extremely ecstatic. And I don't want to rant about him too much longer, but in addition to his coaching, he's also been a scout for the Swedish national team. So he's done it all at almost every level, from college to juniors to, Swedish national team. So he is, without a doubt in my mind, the most qualified individual we could have for the job. Now,
he's somebody that a fellow gentleman by the name of Anthony Chandra writes for Die by the Blade. You know him, I know him.
Yes.
He's tweeted a lot about him, and to the point where I'm like, I'm sold on it because usually I agree with him and we look at things the same way, as do me and you. We look at things very similarly in terms of hockey and sports in general. But if he's tweeting it that much, and if you're tweeting it, I'm going to take your word for it, because I will say that while I love hockey and I've been a Sabres fan my whole life, the Sabres to me have disappointed me so much more than the Bills, and it's not because they're better. It's not because the Bills are better. The Bills are not better than this. I mean, the Bills have made some bad moves too. We talked about it. Everyone knows that they didn't make the playoffs for 17 years. Yeah, but the Sabres have been so good. They've had so many great players walk through that arena, play on their end of the side of the bench, that they have just squandered every great talent that they've almost ever had. If you really look at it, and I hate to say that because it puts like such this negative tone on it, but for me it's so much harder being a Sabres fan than it is a Bills fan, because they have the potential, they have the hockey heaven mystique. There's been some great moments in Sabres history with great, Hall of Fame-esque players. I think, personally, my opinion, best goalie to ever play the game wore a Sabres uniform for, 10 years in Hasek? Almost 10 years. So there's a lot.
70 saves in a playoff shutout.
Right.
That tells you. I know that's only one game, but that's how he approached every game.
Right. And the team around him was not that great. They were okay. Yeah. They did everything. The things had to fall into place, and largely it was because of his dominance that he was, pun intended, that he was able to do that. But it's so hard because a few years back they bring in Pat LaFontaine to be the VP of their franchise, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, okay, I like Pat LaFontaine. I don't know too many people that don't like Pat LaFontaine. Pretty stand-up guy, former Sabre and all that. And then that falls through because of the GM. And then the coach gets fired because he doesn't want to lose like this. I mean, it was embarrassing. It was obvious to the other teams that they were losing, and to the fans, and all for this. It's just, it's tough. It's very hard, and it makes me think to myself now, in today's day and age, where you have Jack Eichel, you have Sam Reinhart, you have Rasmus Dahlin, who, despite the circumstances of the coach not coaching well and all that, he had a phenomenal season this past year. Phenomenal. So it's very tough for me to kind of just dive into the Sabres. I want to. I will. I always do. But every time I dive in, it's like I'm just diving into a pool that's made of concrete. And I'm just left there with a concussion, and I'm just not feeling that great. Weird analogy, but it's very tough. It does work. It does work. As far as, you like the coach from Sweden, and you think that he would be a good fit. I think that there's a lot of really cool facts about that coach. The fact that he was the fact that he was not just a coach but a scout. The fact that he worked with Rasmus Dahlin. For a little while, there was chatter that Chris Taylor would possibly be the coach, but given how abrupt the playoff ended for the Rochester Americans, I don't see that as a possibility now. Do you?
I'm not totally dead set against it, and for me, it's always been like I guess if you really wanna, that's okay. But I was kind of looking for answers as to why maybe they didn't take Wedgwood out for Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, and it came out that he had to have hip surgery, and they wanted to keep him as a backup, but they didn't want to hurt his injury more by having him start a full game. So that's understandable. But and they kind of ran into a hot goalie that just wouldn't give much up. So I'm not going to fault Chris Taylor completely for being swept again, but at the same time, they got swept again. Mm-hmm. And, if at this point, and I know you and I, we talked about it on Twitter, it's one of the rare things I see that we've disagreed about on Twitter. I was trying to, justify the potential Chris Taylor hiring, and it still kind of does just make sense with how, the stars align. But I'm really not there on it anymore.
Right.
I'd rather Gronberg. I'd rather, Sheldon Keefe has been considered a candidate. He's the coach of the Marlies, who just swept them.
Oh, wow.
And after, I know, how ironic.
Yeah.
And after they swept them, he came out and said, that's a great organization they have over there. And I'm going to be honest with you, we should not have swept them. Our goalie just came out and he played better than he played his best hockey of the year for 3 games. So he was talking highly of the organization. Obviously, that could just be coach speak. It could also be he knows this could be where his career takes him next. So,
right. I do think that's sincere.
That.
I do think that's sincere, and that's another layer to the whole damned if you do, damned if you don't fandom of the Sabres, is that they do have this aura about them because they are one of the teams that came in 1970 that had, the French Connection, and there's a great history of that team, and it's very tough to kind of wrap your head around how they are still where they are when at one point, 10, 11 years ago, they were the best team, one of the best 3-4 teams in the league. And could have easily been in a Stanley Cup had things kind of bounced their way in certain ways, but
Jamie Key not gotten a staph infection.
Right. So it's like it's very tough knowing all that and knowing their history and seeing it and living through it, and then knowing that they're where they are. Where right now they have more pure talent on their team in terms of the skill players that they have, like Eichel, like Reinhart, Middlestat you mentioned, who I always forget for some reason, but I think I forget about him because he's just not quite seen the way that he should be yet, because he's not being used the right way, So
and unfortunately, and I won't completely blame Housley for it. He could have constructed Middlestat's line differently, but he did get thrown into the second line role
right away,
way earlier than they anticipated. I'm not going to say they shouldn't have traded O'Reilly, because that's extremely debatable, and there's a good argument on both sides, and we don't really have the time to get into it. But if they had a number 2 center that was quality, that wouldn't Vontae Davis the Sabres and leave, in the middle, just out of nowhere, in Patrick Berglund. That wouldn't have had to.
Right.
Yeah.
That I definitely. My next question was, I have a theory as far as their quote unquote turning point, and I talked about it at that second Buffalo Podathon a little bit, and I talked about it with Trainwreck Sports, the Maniac and Ty B and Degenerate Al a little bit. My turning,
great guys.
Yeah, awesome guys. Shout out to them. Is that to me the turning point is when Patrick Berglund decided that he would rather not play hockey at all than play for the Sabres in a Vontae Davis-esque move.
Yeah,
it made me step back a little bit. It made me pause. Not that Patrick Berglund is this great player. I don't think he's great. He's probably fair. No. Probably a fair player. Yeah.
Around average.
Around average.
Maybe a little bit below at this point in his career.
Right. But when you have storylines previously to that, where you have Ryan O'Reilly say, "Oh, I lost my love for the game. I don't have passion. I'm used to losing. I'm getting complacent." All the things that he said, which largely led to his departure from the Sabres and the trade and all that. Then you have a situation where you have another player say, "Well, I don't care what people think of my personal life. My personal life is my personal life. If you want to take it out on me, fine. I'll play hockey the way I want to play it. I'll on and off the ice." And that would be Evander Kane. And then you have this situation with Patrick Berglund where he just says, "I don't want to play hockey for this team. I don't care if I play hockey at all. If I'm playing for this team, I'd rather quit." So you wonder, is it the players or is it the coaches that they bring in? And it would largely be an obvious answer that it is the coaches that they're bringing in because they'll be on their third coach in 5 years. But if they bring in another coach and in 2 years we're having the same conversation, I don't know which way is up.
And that's why, I really think they have to go outside of the box and not hire someone who has a history in the league. And it's not to say, an experienced NHL coach isn't the way to go. But if you look at the candidates that are left, like, the potential ones they could hire, on the Instigators on WGR a few days ago, Darren Drager from TSN came on and said that Jacques Martin was going to be, is apparently a top candidate. He's 66 years old and has 2 cups, but not as a coach. Yeah. So that's not exactly what we need. And I went and I did a little digging because I was kind of trying to figure out what has he done in his career. In 16 full seasons, he did get fired one season. So, think of that too. He missed the playoffs 4 times. Of the other 12 seasons, he made it into the first round and lost. Then 7 times. Then 3 times he got into the second round and lost. And then the last 2 times he lost in the conference finals. 17 seasons really, as an NHL head coach. And the closest he ever got to a Stanley Cup appearance at all was losing twice in the conference finals. So that's not exactly what I'm going to be looking for in a head coach.
And I agree with you there because the Sabres, the quote unquote end game, pun intended again, is that you want to make it to a Stanley Cup. They haven't been to a Stanley Cup since they were robbed of the last time they were in a Stanley Cup. I'm not even going to get into that because that's just I can't. But but I will say that you want to get to a Stanley Cup. Who did this? What was his name again?
The Swedish coach?
Not the Swedish coach. The one that you were talking about that had 16 years.
Jacques Martin.
Who did he coach for?
He was most recently... Okay, yeah, so he hasn't actually been a head coach since 2012 when he got fired from Montreal. And then he also coached... I'm going to pull it up real quick because I had it right there. He coached for the St. Louis Blues in the 80s, Senators in the 90s, up until the early 2000s. Then he went to Florida, missed the playoffs for 3 straight years, and then he ended up in Montreal where he got fired.
And he was fired as an assistant. He was never a head coach.
Oh, well, he was fired. Those are his years as a head coach. Ever since then, he's been an assistant. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So he's been in the NHL as a head coach since the 80s to like the early 2000s, and then as an assistant after that.
2012, he's been an assistant. And his and I'm sorry, I made a mistake earlier. His 2 cups came as an assistant coach with the Penguins.
So he comes from Pittsburgh, right?
Exactly. So if we are going to bring him on, I'm hoping that we're interviewing him now as possibly a candidate to be an assistant coach to Gronberg, because he's someone who knows how the American style of hockey is played, which is a little different than the Swedish style, mainly, the ice surface size and, things of that nature. The Swedish and international style of play is starting to mimic North American, but it's not quite there yet. Wow. Someone like Martin could really help Gronberg make that adjustment but it's not completely necessary. But if that's what he was brought on as, I would be able to justify that a little bit more.
Well, I think it's safe to say that this offseason's just getting started for the Buffalo Sabres.
And I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more about it. It might be a little venting like this was, but
it's necessary. I mean, how could you not? I mean, we saw things that no one should have to see. No one. I wouldn't wish this season on the NHL team that I hate the most. I really wouldn't. I really wouldn't. It was very hard, and it's very tough when you have talents like they have, and you've seen them squander talent, and you've seen the talent go to other teams and do really well. I don't want to see that again. I can't see it again. I can't handle it. I can't.
And so we're all in it together. So if we got to handle it for a few more years,
right.
I mean, we have good people to talk to.
That's for sure. Well, Jake, it was a pleasure having you on. Enjoy the draft tonight. We'll definitely talk in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, buddy. Take care. Go Bills, go Sabres, right?
Yep, absolutely. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Take care, man. Jake Watkins of TrainwreckSports.com. As we dived into the state of the Sabres on this edition of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. And we will be right back, rolling with Ty B of TrainwreckSports.com. See you in a bit.